So, folks, let's have a little chat about Duels. You may have noticed over the last month or two, I went back to Duels to see what was up with the game mode. I hadn't really played it too much since its initial release, and we did, I don't know, 15, 20 runs of Duels to get a feel for what was going on in the game mode. And I wanted to have a conclusion to this video series where I break down my thoughts about Duels and what it all means, essentially. And trying to get organized around that's been pretty tough. At the end of the day, I'm torn because I think Duels has some really significant problems, like a lot of problems, which I'll enumerate in this video. But, at the end of the day, I also just had fun on occasion. Not every round or not every run, but there were still a lot of fun moments to be had. And it certainly felt like the more I played, the more fun I was having. I think as I developed a little bit of mastery of the mode, we started figuring out the right sort of decks and builds and what to expect. It got more fun over time. And I suspect if I spent another month grinding Duels, it'd probably keep getting more and more fun. So it feels like there's something buried here in Duels that's magical. It's really awesome. And I think it could be like one of my favorite game modes if it wasn't just covered in all these various little problems and hiccups along the way. Now, everybody's experiences and expectations for a given game mode are going to be different. So things I enjoy may be different than what you enjoy. So, of course, this is just my perspective on what Duels could be and what I think it should be, but that may be very different from yours. So I'm not saying this is the, end all be all of Duels advice or strategy, but just kind of what I took away from my experience. So this is my personal view. That said, before we get into the laundry list of problems I think Duels has, I just want to talk about a few of the strengths first. Like, let's start on a positive note here, because there are some good aspects to Duels. Number one, I think it has some of the most fun moments in Hearthstone. Some of the biggest, craziest, most absurd things I've seen in the game have happened in Duels. You just don't get that many crazy moments in Standard because there's a cap on the power level of the cards and the synergies. But in Duels, sometimes either you or your opponent can just do completely busted and broken things. And although on occasion it's frustrating when your opponent does it, sometimes it's still really fun to even see your opponent have some absurd pop off. And then when you get those moments, of course, it's a great joy as well to just completely demolish their hopes and dreams, even if you feel a little guilty. It could feel cool to do big, awesome stuff. On top of that, I think Duels offers, a new series of interactions and strategies to explore. Essentially, you're seeing things you've never seen in Hearthstone before if you haven't played Duels. So you're breaking down, different metas, different card interactions, different mechanical interactions that might not exist otherwise. And, that's a good way to stretch your brain. You're saying, like, how do these cards work together? How does this passive empower these sorts of things? What can I do to make this as good as possible? So it's definitely a way to stretch those strategic muscles a little bit and explore some new space that's just, expanding upon normal Hearthstone. I don't know that it's any more complex than normal Hearthstone interactions or Battlegrounds interactions or anything else. It's just new and extra ones. So if you want, a new way to scratch that itch, hopping into Duels can probably provide that. And then I think the third major upside I wanted to talk about for Duels is I think the experience varies in Duels more so than in Battlegrounds or Standard. In other words, each run is going to offer you something a little bit different. Now, this used to not be the case when we started in Duels. There were a lot of deterministic builds that people were sort of always going towards. And you'll still see those pop up from time to time. Things like Murloc Shamans and Divine Shield Paladins and like Rushy Warriors or Legendary Warriors are the kind of common archetypes I've seen a lot. But you'll still be surprised by the variations within because people's card buckets are always going to be different. So you're not going to have the same 30 card list like in Standard that you're facing off against, or the same, 6-7 minion build in Battlegrounds that people are trying to optimize towards, right? It's going to be a lot of variation for the cards within a given list. So sometimes you're surprised, sometimes you find stuff you wouldn't expect, and sometimes decks, that shouldn't exist or you would never see normally just pop up. It's like, whoa, that's a crazy deck. What did they do to get there? How is that so good? So I do think you get, fresher experiences perhaps than in the other primary game modes. My God, I'm not even mentioning Arena. Arena can definitely have, an array of experiences, but they are a little bit more, flat. Duels expands into craziness. So I think it's a more varied experience. If you're getting bored of the same old stuff all the time, Duels might be able to offer a fix for that. So those are the Duels specific strengths on top of all the normal Hearthstone strengths, fun characters and artwork and sounds and all that great stuff. That said, let's talk about Duels problems. And this is a much longer list. It is definitely a little more specific. We're going to nitpick a little more as far as problems are concerned, because there's a lot of small things I think could just help improve the Duels experience a little bit. But I think to kick it off, I have to talk first off about the sort of launch of Duels and where it went wrong from the beginning, perhaps, because it very much feels like when Duels came out, it sort of shot itself in the foot. And I think there were two major reasons that happened. Number one, Duels content and actually literally the access to Duels at the very beginning are both locked to players. Many people can't really get in and have the full Duels experience. It was like behind a pre-order initially, but even after that, there's still a problem where you have to unlock the hero powers and treasures via collection requirements. So Duels has this sort of two-step gating where you have to have the cards to build your deck. So you want to have good cards to build a good deck, much like regular Hearthstone. But then you get this second layer where you just have to have a raw total number of cards, like 40 cards from whatever set, or certain number of legendaries. I don't even remember all the requirements, but a lot of people don't meet the requirements and therefore don't have access to various hero powers or the signature treasures from the start of a Duels run. So some people feel like they just can't get in there and play because they're just hamstrung from the very beginning, which can also make it feel a little bit more pay to win, because if you spend more money to have a good collection, you're going to have a better Duels experience. So unless you're somebody who collects every card or a vast majority of cards, Duels may feel like it's just not for you right off the bat. So between those two things, hammering people down at the very beginning of Duels, it's like, well, man, a lot of people just ignored the mode, which of course has this negative feedback loop where, oh, look, nobody's playing Duels, so we're not going to support the mode as much. We're not going to offer as many content updates. Not as many developers are going to be on there. Not as many design people. So, I don't know that that's happened necessarily behind the scenes. Maybe Duels has all the support it was ever intended to get, but you could certainly imagine it being left behind because people just didn't really get into it and the population numbers aren't necessarily there to support further investment and development into the mode. On top of that, Duels also launched during the Battle Pass fiasco where everybody got really upset about the monetization on the new Battle Pass and rewards track system. There were a lot of angry people with Hearthstone at that point. So, Duels came out, had some monetization issues to kind of double down on the rewards track issues. So it's just a lot of people were soured to the game mode or weren't really playing Duels or Hearthstone at all when it came out, so never got a chance to jump in. So I worry that negative launch experience is just, going to have lasting impacts on the future development of the mode. That said, it feels like a lot of the problems I'm going to talk about here, which I'll try to get into more quickly moving forward, may never get fixed or may have been ignored already because of that bad start. So I feel like it's all kind of drawing back to that initial problem when Duels very first began. And then I think there's one other major thing at the foundation of a lot of Duels problems, and that's that you build your own starter deck for Duels. That beginning 15 cards seems to create a lot of other issues, which we'll kind of get into. But at a raw level, when you do that, when you seed the dungeon run or the Duels run experience with that 15 starter cards, it opens up a couple design problems because you have these determinism problems that exist where suddenly you have expectations for what treasures you're supposed to get. And Blizzard has this dial where if they turn that up too much and you always get the exact right treasures, Duels get solved and it gets boring, which has happened in the past. If you turn it down too low, then you feel like the treasures you get offered never match your deck. And you feel disappointed because it's like, oh my God, I got trash treasures. All of that ties back to the fact that you had to build your own deck. If you were building a deck on the fly, or perhaps if you selected a passive treasure first, then you wouldn't have as many disappointing moments and those feel bad moments where, you just things didn't line up, or alternatively, the game mode gets solved too easily and everybody has just crazy perfect deck optimization and it's another version of standard. creating that dichotomy of like super high hits and misses is all rooted to me in building your own deck. So I'll talk more about like potential solutions I want to propose later, but I have a feeling if the deck building wasn't part of Duels, that might just go away. That said, I'm pretty sure Blizzard included the deck building process because they wanted your collection to matter. Battlegrounds came out totally free to enter, and suddenly collections don't matter. People's cards are irrelevant, and that is Blizzard's primary monetization method is via pack openings. And that was probably a big issue where they said, oh my God, nobody's spending money on packs because they just play Battlegrounds now. I have a feeling that made a major impact on the bottom line. So your next game mode comes out, you say, look, we got to connect this to collections. And they actually took it too far. They made not only that you had to build your deck via your collection, it also had to include wild cards, which is annoying, and it's a rotation of wild cards, which is extra hard to keep up with. And then on top of that, they also said, if you even want unlocks, we're going to tie it to your collection as well. So essentially, they swung the pendulum too far back into interaction with your collection, whereas Battlegrounds had basically zero, or does have zero interaction with your collection. So, you know, all of it is essentially rooting back to that one single problem, I think, for the structure of the beginning of a Duels run, cascades so many other issues and bad moments. All right, so that major thing covered, let's talk about some of the quick specific stuff. There are informational problems in Duels. Things like you can't see your opponent's hero power very clearly in the mulligan phase. You may have no idea what hero power they have unless you've memorized the artwork of every hero power exactly, and it's also kind of obscured and hidden as well. I think particularly on mobile, this is an issue. So just some little UI stuff like that that would help, you know, when there's just so many different hero powers and they're all different and they might change in the future. Like you need that sort of thing to have, you know, an idea of what to mulligan for. Similarly, you don't know what cards are in a Duels deck when you build it until you get to the deck building phase. So for instance, I wanted to play like a fire deck, and I was like, well, what fire spells exist in the Duels pool for like mage or shaman? And I want to pick between the two. There's no way to look at that inside of Hearthstone. I had to go to the website, load up the current Duels card tab in the card library on the Hearthstone website to see what fire spells were available. Otherwise, I would have had to commit to mage or shaman to get to that deck building phase to see. And once you get into the deck building phase of Duels, you can't back out. They don't let you back out once you're in the deck building phase, which makes no sense to me. There's nothing that you've had to commit at that point. You should be able to go back and choose one of the same 4 classes that you had on offer before. So just weird like limitations and hiding information that should be very readily available to help you make decisions in Duels. That also kind of ties into quality of life things. Not being able to back out is strange. Also, I think it'd be really cool if you had some way to save Duels decks. It's annoying to kind of just have to have like deck codes out on the side or pull up a website every time or rebuild it by hand every time. It's not huge, you know, to have a little Excel spreadsheet of your deck codes or whatever, but it's just another inconvenience that doesn't need to exist. So having some kind of mini collection manager or just deck saving option for Duels, even if it just remembered the last deck you played of the same class, those little things might go a long way towards removing some of the barriers to playing Duels. On top of that, there are, you know, we've run into a lot of different bugs, things like duplicate treasures, limiting options, art that doesn't fill the frame and doesn't line up. There's like a few instances of card art that's not filling the frame, and it's just like such a minor thing that feels so counter to the production quality that Blizzard and Hearthstone have always prioritized. And that's the sort of thing that makes you feel like Duels is left out, or maybe doesn't get as many eyeballs or as much attention as it should, because it's like, why is this still happening after all this time? Also, just stuff like your diamond cards not being playable in Duels, like you add a diamond card to your deck, then it never actually shows up in the runs, and it just kind of feels bad. And then there are design issues. This one's, you know, somewhat perspective based, but I feel like there are very often moments where I get completely useless passives. And this does come down to some of that sort of determinism slider we talked about earlier, where it's like you don't want your deck to be too deterministic, but you also don't want total garbage being offered. And sometimes there are things that just make zero sense, getting offered like death rattle synergy cards with no death rattles in your deck. I sort of think those things shouldn't happen. You shouldn't always get the perfect treasure, but you also probably shouldn't get just completely useless ones. And maybe that's almost a problem with the treasure pool or the passive pool, where there need to be things that are maybe just like a little bit more generic that can fill in some of those gaps so that there are still meaningful choices without making things totally solved. You've also got the problem of like just completely crazy buckets being offered. Buckets are supposed to be matched up to your deck at least a little bit, kind of makes sense, give you some options based on various little variables within your deck. But sometimes you get things that are just completely nonsensical that don't match any angle of your deck at all. There are also some examples of treasures, I think, just not having a lot of opportunity based on the card pool. I think we focus on like Dragon Priest. It's like it's really hard to build a priest deck that supports dragons. Maybe you don't need to do that, but it's like, well, those cards exist. It might be fun. It just feels like missed opportunity. Maybe not a problem inherently. It's just like, okay, it'd be great if that could happen, or if there was a card in that slot that opened up a different angle of play. And then I also think there are some balance issues where the difference between certain treasures feels just too significant. There are just huge gulfs between the power levels of certain things, where you hit one, it's like, okay, that's a 10-win run guaranteed. You hit another, and it's just like, oh, this deck's going to cap out at like 3-4 wins at best case scenario. Flattening out that power level a little bit might be nice. I think it's good to have sort of chase stuff, really exciting things, the ultra rare treasures and stuff that exist in the game. That's cool, but I almost wish that they were like, significant in the rarity because of like the fun or the game altering nature, as opposed to just raw power level. So like Capture the Flag is just like a raw power level card, but I don't really think it's that fun. It doesn't really change much, just kind of makes all your numbers bigger. So, Wax Rager being an ultra rare treasure, that's more cool to me because that like really changes things. It's got crazy synergy potential. It's, specific and niche, and it's a single card being drawn. That's cool. But for passives in particular, if they're just too powerful, I don't know if that feels as good. I also think there's, been a tendency that it's hard to play kind of off the wall, wacky stuff where it feels like Duels, that's probably where it should live. And maybe this is more of a personal opinion. And I have to say some of the like balance changes recently did this well. Like for instance, we just had that great Paladin run with the endurance training taunt synergy card. There might be opportunities to make really, strangely designed decks like taunt decks better by buffing those sorts of passives or treasures that open up angles that aren't being traditionally seen. So just a balanced pass that, creates opportunities for different ways to play the game could go a really long way. And then on top of that, the big final thing here is updates. I feel like Duels has barely been updated. We got the initial unlocks of the signature treasures and hero powers, like that kind of happened over time, but we're still in Wizard Duels. I'll be frank, I thought Duels was going to rotate like the Wizard Duels theme, like every expansion. It's like, oh, I thought, we were getting Scholomance and it was going to be Dark Moon themed. And then, whatever was next. I don't know what their plan was for this. I don't know if it's changed. I don't know if we're getting less content that was anticipated. But to me, it feels like Duels needs a major shakeup at this point. Like we've had the same batch of hero powers and signature treasures in rotation now. And I think a new wave of the, Wizard Duels, whatever the next step is, the Stormwind Duels, whatever, the Stockade Duels, something cool like that would be very, very welcome. Because at the moment, Duels gets kind of stale if you don't have new stuff introduced. And it's going to feel just like static, and it's going to feel like Wizard Duels is permanent. So I want to see more new Duels contents and updates, kind of give Duels a second chance, almost a relaunch of sorts to bring more people back into it. So those are, the problems that are top of mind. I'm sure there's stuff I'm forgetting that we ran into, or just, generalized problems with Duels that I didn't cover, but that's, I kind of made a list and that's what I got through. So, I feel bad just like laying out a bunch of problems without, trying to be constructive and offer some solutions. That said, I'm not a designer. I don't, have as much access to the data, the iteration that's happened behind the scenes. Like a lot of fixes might already have been proposed and tried and they didn't work, and so on and so forth. So it feels a little problematic for me to say like, oh, do this and do that. And it's like, well, they probably already tried all those sorts of things, right? It's not an easy solution by any means. That said, I'll feel like a jerk if I don't offer some solution. So I kind of already teased, I think if you drafted a deck instead of building a deck, that would offer a lot of fixes to some of the core design and structural problems that Duels carries into a run. I also teased I think it could be better if you picked a passive first and built your deck towards the passive as opposed to picking a passive that's built towards your deck, because then, you know, maybe less interesting base passives become cool if you can really fine tune a deck to them. Otherwise, what's going to happen is people are always going to build like the perfect shell deck and try to hit that home run passive, which I think if you went the other way, it might be cooler. I also think one thing that Duels is missing is more deck manipulation. Like we had Bob's Tavern in dungeon runs, where you could go in and remove cards and just make all these kinds of little changes to your deck. And of course, it wouldn't be exactly the same as dungeon runs. You'd want to tweak it to make sure it fit into Duels and nothing crazy happened. But some way to go in and modify things and adjust things and tidy up your deck along the way, other than just adding cards, would be a really, really cool option as well. So all that said, what's the takeaway here? What's the big back to Duels learnings? Should you play Duels? If you got a huge collection and you like this style of thing, sure, yeah, I think you'll find some absolute fun moments in Duels. If you don't have a huge collection, should you like invest in getting a bunch of Duels decks together and venturing into Duels? I don't think so. I think I'd still wait and see what happens with this mode. See where it goes, see if some refinements and design changes can be made to make it a more compact and exciting sort of experience. And I guess I have to ask, like, is Duels going to be supported? Is it going to be put on the back burner? I guess we'll never really know what was intended versus what reality will be, but I sure hope we get more content updates and Duels isn't just left to the wayside. I think I will keep playing as long as there's interesting things to explore and fun things keep happening in Duels. I think we'll pop in once or twice a week and give it a shot. And certainly if we get some new content updates, I'll probably dive in super hard and play more Duels, because I think you guys like watching it probably more than you like playing it. And I certainly have had some fun, so I'm cool with giving it some more time. So all that said, what do you think about Duels? What's your take on it? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for joining me on this journey back to Duels. It's been super fun and insightful, and I hope our experience has helped advance the game mode, bring some people to it, and give it a little bit of much needed attention. That is certainly cool if we were able to achieve that. All that said, thanks much for watching this video, and until next time, game on.
Yeah.